I never thought the worst morning of my life would also be the one that changed everything. I was 20 minutes late, my coffee was cold, and my landlord had just texted me about 3 months of overdue rent. I walked into the office already feeling like a man quietly drowning, when my assistant manager stopped me at the door with a look I had never seen on her face before. "Mr. Callum, Miss Hargrove wants you now." Her private office. My stomach dropped. Elena Hargrove, CEO. The kind of woman who made boardrooms go silent just by entering them. In 2 years of working beneath her, she had never once said my name directly. Not once. I straightened my tie, knocked twice, and stepped inside. She didn't look up from the documents on her desk immediately. She let me stand there, fully, deliberately, for a long 10 seconds before those sharp gray eyes finally lifted to meet mine. "Sit down, Callum." I sat. She slid a folder across the desk. Clean, crisp, formal. "I need a husband," she said, the same way someone orders coffee. "For exactly 1 year. The compensation is $100,000. I'd like your answer by Friday." I stared at her for what felt like an entire geological era. "I'm sorry," I said slowly. "Could you repeat that?" "Because I'm fairly certain I just heard you propose to me using the same tone you use for quarterly reports." The corner of her mouth didn't even twitch. "You heard me correctly," she said, folding her hands on the desk with the precision of a surgeon. "Hargrove Industries is finalizing a merger with Castellan Group. Montgomery Castellan, the patriarch, is deeply traditional. He will not sign a $50 million deal with an unmarried woman running the company alone. He considers it." She paused, as though the next word physically offended her. "Unstable. And out of everyone in this building," I said carefully, "you chose me. You're observant, presentable, and you don't talk excessively," she replied. "In this office, that combination is rarer than you'd think." I almost laughed. Almost. I took the folder home that night and read every page twice. It was the most thorough, most coldly constructed document I had ever held in my hands. There were clauses for public appearances, clauses for social media conduct, clauses for physical boundaries, written so precisely that even a handshake required contextual justification. She had thought of everything except, apparently, how bizarre it was to contract a human being for emotional performance. I needed the money. That part was embarrassingly simple. My father's medical bills had been quietly swallowing me whole for 14 months, and my savings account looked like it had given up on life entirely. So on Friday morning, I walked back into her office, sat down without being asked this time, and slid the signed folder back across her desk. She glanced at my signature, said nothing, just gave a single, efficient nod. "You'll move into the guest suite of my residence this weekend," she said. "I'll have the details sent to you." "Lovely," I said. "Should I bring a housewarming gift, or is there a clause against that too?" She looked up then, just briefly. Something passed behind those gray eyes, not quite amusement, but adjacent to it. "Don't push it, Callum." Moving in was its own kind of theater. Her home was exactly what I expected. Architectural, immaculate, and almost aggressively quiet. Everything in its place. No clutter, no personality scattered across the countertops. No evidence that a human being with feelings actually lived there. It felt less like a home and more like a very expensive idea of one. She gave me a tour with the warmth of a museum guide. Kitchen, library, your suite, my suite, which you will never enter without explicit invitation. "Understood," I said. "And the living room? Is that neutral territory, or do I need to submit a formal request?" She stopped walking, turned to look at me with an expression that was somewhere between irritation and reluctant recalibration. "Do you find yourself amusing?" she asked. "Frequently," I said. "You'll get used to it." She didn't respond, but she also didn't fire me on the spot, which I chose to interpret as progress. The first real test came 3 days later. Her assistant called us both into a prep session for an upcoming Castellan family dinner. Apparently, Montgomery Castellan wanted to meet us informally before any paperwork was discussed. We needed to look the part. We needed to feel the part. Her assistant, a nervous young woman named Priya, sat across from us with a clipboard and the expression of someone defusing a bomb. So, Priya began gently, "We should probably discuss how you two interact as a couple." Alina and I looked at each other. The silence lasted exactly long enough to be uncomfortable. "We're working on it," I said. Alina straightened her jacket and said nothing. But this time, and I noticed it clearly, she didn't quite meet my eyes. And for a woman who held eye contact like a weapon, that small, quiet evasion told me everything. The Castellan dinner was held at a private estate 40 minutes outside the city, Old Money. The kind of place where the hedges were trimmed into perfect geometry, and the silence had a texture to it. I adjusted my tie in the car on the way there, and Elena reached over without a word and straightened it with 2 fingers. Quick, precise, unbothered, as though she had done it 1,000 times before. I looked at her. She looked out the window. "Thank you," I said. "You had a crooked tie," she replied. "It would have reflected poorly on me." "Right," I said. "For a moment I thought you almost cared. Don't flatter yourself." Callum. But the ghost of something that wasn't quite professional detachment, lingered in the small space between us the entire rest of the drive. Montgomery Castellan was exactly what I had imagined. 70s, silver-haired, with the handshake of a man who believed character was measured in firmness of grip. He looked at Elena with the particular brand of skepticism that powerful women have been quietly enduring for centuries. Then he looked at me, and something in his assessment shifted, as though my presence beside her recalibrated his entire reading of the room. "So," he said, settling into his chair at the head of the long dining table, "how did you two meet?" Elena opened her mouth. I spoke first. "She interviewed me," I said, reaching over and resting my hand lightly over hers on the table. And somewhere between her third impossible question and the moment she told me I was adequately promising, I decided I wasn't leaving without her number. Montgomery laughed, a real one, surprised out of him. Elena turned to look at me with an expression so perfectly calibrated between warmth and barely contained homicide that I genuinely couldn't tell which direction she was leaning. "He's being generous," she said smoothly, turning back to Montgomery. "What he means is that he was persistent to the point of being a minor inconvenience." "The best love stories always start that way," Montgomery's wife said warmly from across the table. Under the table, Elena's hand turned, almost imperceptibly, and her fingers rested against mine. Not pulling away, just staying. I kept my expression perfectly neutral. Internally, I had absolutely no idea what to do with that information. The drive home was quieter than the drive there. She had her elbow resting against the window, watching the city lights blur past. The composed, architectural version of Elena Hargrove that existed in boardrooms and dinner parties had softened, just slightly, around the edges. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "You did well tonight," she said finally, without turning from the window. "High praise," I said. "I'll have it framed. Don't, too late." I'm already mentally choosing the font. The quietest sound escaped her then. It wasn't quite a laugh. It was something smaller and more unguarded than that, the kind of sound a person makes when amusement catches them off guard before they can stop it. I stored it away like something rare. Then we walked back into the house, and she stopped in the hallway. And I watched the warmth drain from her face in real time, replaced by something complicated and unreadable. Because standing in the living room, with a travel bag at his feet and an easy, familiar smile on his face, was a man I had never seen before. But Elena clearly had. Her entire body went still in a way I had never witnessed. Not composed stillness, but the specific paralysis of someone confronting something they believed was safely buried in the past. "Daniel," she said. His name in her mouth sounded like a warning. He smiled wider. "Hello, Elena. And you must be the husband." His eyes moved to me with an interest that felt less like curiosity and more like calculation. "I've been hearing such interesting things. If you felt that tension, drop a comment below and tell me. Do you trust Daniel? Because I wasn't sure I did. And neither, I think, was she. Don't forget to hit like if you're already invested in where this is going." Daniel Mercer, as it turned out, was her ex-fiancé, Priya told me the next morning in a hushed corridor whisper, with the energy of someone who had been holding that particular piece of information under pressure for a very long time. Apparently he and Elena had been engaged 3 years ago. Apparently it had ended badly. Apparently badly was doing a significant amount of heavy lifting in that sentence, because the way Elena had looked at him in that hallway, that frozen, almost breakable stillness, told me the story went considerably deeper than a clean separation. He was staying in the city for 2 weeks. Business, he claimed. And because Elena's world was the particular size that it was, their social circles overlapped enough that avoiding him entirely wasn't an option. Which meant I needed to be more convincing than ever. She came into the kitchen the following morning, earlier than usual, no blazer. Just a white shirt, her hair down, a coffee cup held in both hands like it was the only steady thing in the room. She looked, for the first time since I had known her, like someone who hadn't slept. I was already at the counter making eggs. She stopped in the doorway. "You cook," she said. Less an observation, more a small recalibration of whatever model she had built of me in her head. "Occasionally," I said, "when I'm not busy being a minor inconvenience." She sat down at the kitchen island without being asked, which, in the unspoken geography of this house, felt quietly significant. I slid a plate across to her. She looked at it for a moment, then at me. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," I said simply. "Eat, Elena." Something moved across her face. Not quite vulnerability. Something just before it, the expression of a person standing at the edge of allowing themselves to be taken care of, and not being entirely sure the ground is solid. She ate. We talked that morning in a way we hadn't before. Not about the contract, not about Castellan, not about Daniel. She told me about growing up as the only daughter of a man who built an empire and assumed she would simply inherit his ambition without also inheriting his loneliness. She said it plainly, without self-pity, staring into her coffee cup, and that plainness made it hit harder than any dramatic confession would have. "You talk about loneliness like it's a business metric," I said quietly. "Like it's something to be managed rather than felt." She was quiet for a long moment. "That's because feeling it doesn't change it," she finally said. "No," I agreed, "but pretending it isn't there doesn't either." She looked at me then, fully, without the armor, and for a single unguarded moment, Elena Hargrove looked exactly like what she was underneath all of it. A person who was exhausted from holding everything together alone. I didn't look away, neither did she. That afternoon we attended a charity luncheon where Daniel was also present, smiling, charming, watching Elena with the patient attention of someone waiting for a performance to slip. So I made sure it didn't. I kept my hand at the small of her back. I laughed at the right moments. When she spoke, I watched her the way a man watches someone he finds endlessly interesting, because somewhere between that kitchen conversation and that moment, it had stopped being entirely an act. At one point she leaned close to say something quietly in my ear, and I turned so that our faces were closer than necessary, and I murmured back, "He's watching us." "I know," she whispered. "Good," I said. "Then don't pull away." She didn't. But that night, while she was in a call with her legal team, I walked past the library and noticed her desk. A folder, open, with a document on top that I recognized, because it had my name on it, and a date. A date that was 4 months earlier than the date she had told me. The merger required the contract to end. I stood in that doorway, the same way she had stood in the hallway the night Daniel arrived, completely still, trying to understand what exactly I was looking at, and what it meant that she hadn't told me. I didn't say anything that night. I closed the library door quietly, walked back to my suite, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a long time. Turning the information over in my mind, the